All right. So what I thought we'd do today is talk about the inner critic, something that I think we all know very well. And and I think it's important to look at that process because it not only affects us, but it affects everyone around us, right? So the first thing we always do, particularly in mindfulness and self-compassion, is to pull back and say, okay, we have this thing, this inner critic. It's not pleasant, but it must be there for a reason, right? So the question is why what function does this self-criticism serve? You know, is there any value in it? And I'm sure evolution didn't put it in us just to drive us nuts and make us go to classes like this. And usually, like when we go around in a class, people will offer up things like, oh, that voice motivates me. It gets me to do the right thing. It keeps me from doing something embarrassing or shameful. Sometimes people say it gives you the illusion of control. You know, like if I'm berating myself, well, you know, somehow that makes me feel like I'm more involved in the situation. Or sometimes a way of maybe protecting ourselves from the opinions of others. If we walk in saying, "Oh, look at how I screwed up," maybe we're feeling that, gosh, you know, people will be nice to us or feel sorry for us. So there's lots of things that that inner critic can do, and it's kind of interesting to consider that. But if we if we really look at it, most of what it's about is keeping ourselves safe. Okay, most of it's a safety issue. You know, the inner critic is usually trying to help us in some way, to protect us from some perceived danger, you know, even if the methods it uses aren't really productive. And you know, it gets back to this idea that we all want to be loved, or you know, or at least liked, but for some reason, you know, lots of times from cultural messages, we feel like we're not lovable, that there's something wrong with us, that whoever we are, we need to be something different to stand out on social media or whatever. So what that means is we can't have our own back, or we don't have our own back. So we're very dependent on the approval of others for our self-worth. Okay. So that inner critic is often just desperately trying to keep us from doing anything that would make others dislike us or think poorly of us. It's just, you know, it's remarkably unskillful in terms of how it does that. You know, for me, when I really listen to that voice, it sounds kind of like a cranky, scared child, you know, one that just wants to feel safe, but it also happens to know how to curse a lot. So I'm going to do an exercise that will maybe encourage you to look to that vulnerability underlying the harshness of the inner critic, and maybe learn how to address that and possibly disarm it, because there's obviously ways that that harsh voice inner critic can harm us. And I think it's, you know, lots of times when I do this talk for healthcare, you know, I need to point out that if you listen carefully, you have two voices. There's one voice that can sometimes be strict and firm, you know, but it tends to have our best interests at heart, and it's saying, you know, okay, you've got to get out of bed now, or you need to check that lab before you go home, you know, uh, but I'm talking about that voice that's needlessly harsh, almost has a metallic quality to it. The one, you know, you moron, how could you be so stupid? That's the voice I'm talking about. And that voice does get in our way. Okay. It just makes us more unhappy and stressed out, right? Or, you know, when we're being berated by that voice, we get narrowed down. So we may not be able to make good decisions in any particular situation. And that voice keeps us from really seeing who we are, you know. You know, and when you think about it, you know, if someone followed you around and said the things that your inner critic says to you all day long, it'd be about 15 minutes and you'd be getting a restraining order. Yet, yet that voice is so internalized, we just think that it belongs there. You know, it's just normal. So you know, it's also important to realize that I'm talking about a voice, but some people don't really have a voice, or they don't recognize it as such. You know, the inner critic can show up in lots of ways, like just a sensation in the body, or just a mood like despair or agitation, or just, you know, this kind of low level begrudging feeling, you know, that just taints your experience. And I do want to pause to take a quick detour here, because we also need to acknowledge that that sometimes an inner critical voice from early caregivers that were traumatic, or weren't caring, those voices have no redeeming value whatsoever. They're not about safety. It's just harsh messages that had to be internalized to survive. So as we do this exercise, I'm really talking about that voice that kind of wants us to be okay, that wants to protect us, not just the voices of just traumatic experiences or unhelpful caregivers. That often needs to be worked through with lots of time and even professional support. But it's important to realize that that harsh voice that we do hear a lot, the one that just is trying to protect us but isn't helpful, uh, although we hear it a lot, we do have that other voice, okay, that sometimes it's strict or firm, but also can be very compassionate. A voice that really comes from this place of wanting us to be safe, wanting us to perform our best, but it's often drowned out by the inner critic. The inner critic is kind of hooked up to the more animal parts of our brain, so it has a bigger megaphone. The compassionate voice is the more recent parts of the brain, so sometimes it gets drowned out. So this will be like a written, almost directed journaling exercise to see if you can explore your inner critic and maybe listen to that inner voice. So what I'm going to do is just invite you to grab a pen and pencil, and maybe we'll settle in real briefly in the middle of a hectic day, maybe just taking a couple of deep breaths if you can, just sensing that, but mostly just checking into the body. So many things are going on, life is so hectic. So allow yourself this moment or two to just soften into the body. Your body, the areas that tend to tighten up. So during a busy day, they kind of tighten and tighten and tighten. So see if you can go in and soften, maybe the neck, the shoulders, maybe the muscles around the eyes, the jaw, just easing down into the abdomen. Really this idea of just allowing yourself the gift of this easing of tension, this releasing of tightness. The abdomen down into the legs, up into the arms, just settling into the chair. And in this practice, I'm going to look at the inner critic from all kinds of different angles. So I'm going to be providing a lot of different prompts. All right. And if anything doesn't work for you or you need to let go of the practice, please feel free to do that. There'll be a handout so you can come back to it. But I'm going to ask you to think of a behavior that you would like to change. Okay. Something that you often beat yourself up about. Okay. Just think about this behavior and what we're doing, Julie, if you're just signing in. This is just an exercise to work with the inner critic. And I'm inviting people to take a moment to settle in, maybe a deep breath, soften into the body. And think about a behavior that you'd like to change. Again, something that you're harsh with yourself. This harsh inner critic tends to show up. And you want to pick a behavior that is unhelpful to you. You do want to change it, and it's potentially changeable. Okay, it's not like my feet are too big. I'm sorry about that, but what can you do? So maybe behaviors might be eating unhealthy foods or procrastinating or getting impatient and snapping at people. Okay. So maybe take a moment to write down this behavior that you would like to change, okay, and that you typically criticize yourself for. And I presume you've had a behavior that's come up. Uh, Now write down what you typically say to yourself when you find yourself doing this behavior. Okay. How does this voice express itself? And not just the words, but the tone of the voice. Sometimes it's all in the tone. Or as you're thinking of how it expresses itself, also think about what it feels like in the body. Okay. Is there just a vague sense of judgment or disapproval or an image or just a clenching, a tightening in the body? Just basically take a moment here to write down how your inner critic expresses itself when you do this behavior. And again, you can return to this, or if you're listening to the recording, you can always put it on pause to explore that more if you wish. But I'm going to invite you to switch perspectives again. Take a moment to get in touch with the part of yourself that feels criticized. Okay. Just notice what it feels like to receive this message, to be the being that's hearing these words. What's the impact on you? How does it feel? And maybe offering yourself just a little bit of kindness, a little bit of compassion for really how hard it is to be the recipient of these kind of harsh words. Again, just writing down what it feels like in some kindness, like, yeah, this hurts, or just maybe acknowledging at least that other people experience this. And then just giving yourself the kindness that you would give another person if you heard someone berating them. And the support and kindness you would offer this other person. Can you offer that for yourself, for hearing this voice, these words for so long? And now we'll change the perspective again and see if you can turn towards that inner critic with interest and curiosity. Okay. Maybe reflecting for a moment on why this criticism has gone on for so long. We're just talking about often the inner critic is just trying to protect us. It doesn't know how to do that very skillfully, but is the inner critic trying to protect you in some way, to keep you safe from danger, to help you, to keep you from doing things shameful or embarrassing? Even if the result has been unproductive, you know, what motivates your inner critic? Just a few sentences that make sense to you. And I'll remind you that sometimes you can't find a way the inner critic is helping. Okay. And maybe it's just the internalized voice of someone who wasn't trying to keep you safe or healthy. So just acknowledging that. Sometimes the criticism has no redeeming value. So as we do this practice, you have an option point here. Okay. Maybe you just want to go back to the previous part of the exercise and just offering yourself compassion and kindness for the pain of this criticism. Just what it's like and supporting yourself. But if as you're writing, you did identify some way your inner critic might be trying to keep you safe, as you explore this, see if you can talk to the inner critic. Okay, acknowledge its efforts. Maybe even writing down a few words of thanks. What we're doing here is we're just letting that inner critic know that even though it may not be serving you very well now, it's just acknowledging that its intention was good and it was doing its best. Just like any other human being, the inner critic just wants to be heard and appreciated. So can you offer that to the inner critic now? what's motivating the inner critic, and acknowledging the the protection that it's trying to offer. And again, sometimes this exploration can be very valuable as the critic shows up in all kinds of different ways, just pausing to acknowledge it, looking for the vulnerability it's trying to protect. So you can do this in all kinds of different settings, just almost like when the inner critic shows up, using that as a warning bell to say, hey, there's some fear here, there's something scary here, and then just acknowledging it. But if your inner critic feels like it has been heard at this point, see if you can make some space for another voice, this kinder, more compassionate voice. And this voice comes from a very wise part of you, okay, and recognizes how this behavior is causing you harm. And it also wants you to change, but for very different reasons. So for this part of the exercise, I'll invite you maybe even to close your eyes. Just take a break from writing. And if it feels right, maybe putting a hand over your heart or other soothing place, just feeling the warmth of your hands, this idea of just letting your body know you're supporting yourself here. And just think about the behavior that you're struggling with. Okay? And as you do that, I'm going to offer some phrases that may capture the essence of your inner compassionate self. Okay, for example, this voice coming from a place that says, I care about you and I don't want you to suffer. That's why I'd like to help you make a change. Okay, or coming from a place that says, I don't want you to keep hurting in this way. I'm here to support you. Just again, visualizing this voice coming from this deeper, more caring place. And sometimes you may want to bring to mind the image of a person who cares deeply about you and imagine what this person might say to you right now. Sometimes it's hard to hear a voice from within. It's so suppressed sometimes. But whether it's from another person that cares about you or whether it's from this part of you that just doesn't want you to keep hurting. See, now maybe open your eyes and begin to write just a short note to yourself, okay, in this compassionate voice. And the invitation here is to just do this freely and spontaneously, just addressing this behavior that you would like to change. You just do this as stream of consciousness. No need to edit it or make it perfect. Again, just breathing, softening, and listening for what emerges from this wish that I care about you and don't want you to suffer. Really, and just let the words come forth. And if it's hard, if you're struggling, it might be easier to write down the words that would flow from your loving heart when speaking to a dear friend, okay, who's struggling with the same issue as you. This invitation here is to just open up to the kindness and wisdom that's always within us and let it speak. Again, if you need to pause and just remember that you're looking for the words that come from a part of you that just says, I care about you. I'm here to support you. Or even just saying that, or I'll be here for you no matter what happens. And then just letting that voice arise. And as you're seeing these words, if you did find some words that came from your compassionate self, see if you can just let yourself savor the feeling of being supported. And sometimes a practice like this, it can be difficult. And remember, that's okay too. Okay. This kind of stuff can take time. It takes a while to undo some of our programming. The important thing is just setting an intention to be kinder to ourselves, and then new habits can form, or at least setting the intention to look for the vulnerability underneath that inner critic. Because again, it's often like a small hurt part of ourselves. And even though it's kind of cranky and fussy, if we can practice recognizing that and offering that small part of ourselves the same kindness we would offer to an unhappy child, we can disarm it a little bit, free ourselves from it, and then be able to attend to this other voice. And the other thing I'd invite you to do, and I'll give you a handout on that as I end this exercise, is recognize that this is also a very powerful way to support yourself if you do it as a form of journaling. This idea of writing a compassionate letter, whatever's going on out there, depression, anxiety, emotions, fights, conflicts, sometimes just taking 5 minutes to just write a letter to yourself, talking about yourself from this supportive standpoint. I care for you, I'm worried about you, and I want you to be okay. And then just see what comes forth from that too. The research suggests that something as simple as that for a few days can begin to change the outlook. So anyway, this was a little different from the usual meditation. I hope you guys found it useful, and just like I said, I'll be sending some handouts, so that'll be with it too. But I'll go ahead and end that. And I feel so bad for you, April, just coughing your way through that exercise. I hope you feel better soon. And thank you, Julie. Any questions or observations, I guess? Yeah, thank you, Julie. Yeah, I just, in the handout, for the first 5 minutes, I just talked a little bit about the dynamic of the inner critic and how it arises, and ways to work with it more in a didactic way. And that'll be on the first part of one of the handouts. So thank you for jumping into the middle of a writing exercise. That was heroic.
Thanks so much for sharing that with us.
Oh, good.
Yeah, and Julie, just so you know, these are all of the Wellness Wednesdays are available on the counseling website and the Religious Life website. They're linked there, and you can access all of the recordings. So yeah, and I appreciated the little bit of a different spin this time. It was fun to engage in some writing. So thanks for sharing that with us, John.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. And then we'll see you in another couple of weeks.
Yes, we will. Next week is spring break. Hallelujah. And
we won't do it on spring break.
No, and we would be 2 weeks out anyway. So we'll have next week off.
Oh, okay. Okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah, nope, you're fine. And then we'll be back in 2 weeks. So the week after spring break, which is March 30th.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think I have that on my calendar. Perfecto.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks so much.